Hey everyone, it's Dale Blasingame. I'm an assistant professor of practice in the School of Journalism and Mass Communication. I'm really excited to be taking part in this module on social media and social media analytics. Over the next couple of minutes, I'm going to be walking you through some of the metrics that we look at with students and in terms of teaching a social media class, kind of a core crash course of what some of this terminology means and why it matters and what's available on the different platforms. So I hope you enjoy it and let me know if you have any questions. All right, so let's start first with some quick terminology, and two terms that you're hear over and over again when you're talking about analytics is impressions versus reach. And they have very different meanings, even though they're oftentimes used kind of in the same context. So impressions are the total number of times some piece of content was placed in a feed. Reach is the total number of unique eyeballs. So in another way of thinking about this, you can think of impressions as total views. You'll notice I have an asterisk there. Reach is total unique viewers. So my asterisk there is impressions doesn't necessarily mean that someone actually saw the content. It just means that it was placed in the feed, but that sometimes helps students understand that. So it's very realistic to have 150,000 impressions on a post, but only a reach of 20,000, meaning that some people may have seen that multiple times in terms of that particular piece of content. Another really important word to think about is engagement, and engagement's a big buzzword, but we don't have a very good definition of what engagement is, and that's because it means several different things. So a like is engagement, a reaction is engagement, and that would be a step up from a like because it requires a press of the thumb. It requires a little bit of psychological action in order to do that. A comment would be an even bigger level of engagement, and not all engagement is positive engagement. A negative comment could be negative engagement when it comes to that. And then there's the share, which for the social platforms that we're most thinking about, Facebook, Twitter, things along those lines, the share is kind of the king of the metrics because that's saying, I think every one of my friends and family should see this piece of content. But there are all kinds of other types of engagement. It just depends on the platform. It depends on the piece of content that you've created. A click is an engagement. A click to call is an engagement. For a restaurant or a doctor's office or something like that, a click to call might be one of the most valuable forms of engagement. YouTube, newsletters, stuff like that. They want you to subscribe. If you do click subscribe, that is valuable engagement. For businesses that do some sort of shopping on social, putting something into the shopping cart is an incredibly valuable, if not the most valuable type of engagement. Mostly for Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the most basic social platforms, reactions, comments, and shares are typically what we think of, again, with shares being the most common. So let's go through those platforms and look at some of the things that we see behind the scenes. And let's start with Facebook. And here's a look at insights. And I'm just going to really quickly walk you through some of the main things that I look for and that I talk about to students and with students in insights. First is you want to go to the post page and get an idea of when your audience is online and when your audience is using Facebook. So you can see Facebook will tell you by the day when your audience is online. So if I'm looking at this, yes, there are some fluctuations, but for the most part, this tells me we should probably have a 7-day-a-week posting schedule. There are no lulls in the schedule. Sometimes if you're a church, for instance, you might see a lull in your audience being online maybe Monday or Tuesday. So those might be, decent days to take a break from posting. But for restaurants and bars, Saturdays and Sundays are going to be your most valuable days, or Fridays and Saturdays in particular. And so you definitely don't want to take those days off. Here's where you get that information. The next one is the whale, and that's the time that your audience is using Facebook. And it's always going to look very similar to this. You're going to notice that particularly, lunchtime on is going to be very strong. The peak usually happens around 8 or 9 o'clock at night, which makes sense because people are laying down or they're relaxing and they're checking Facebook to do that. Does that mean you have to post at that time? No. But what it means is you might want to try some late afternoon, early evening posts to see if you get more engagement. It's all going to be related to the algorithm when it comes to that. And then there's the posts themselves. So yes, you can get a certain amount of information just from the post itself. If you look here, you'll see we had 37 reactions, 1 comment, and 1 share. But I always recommend that you go into the actual post analytics inside Insights to get the actual number of reactions, comments, and shares. Because if you see, we had 37, but if you look at this, we have 43 reactions. So what happened was, if you're just counting on the feed itself, you're only getting the reactions that are happening on that post itself. But Facebook then will let you know how many reactions or comments or shares happened on a share. You can see we had 1 share of this post, and off that 1 share, we got 6 likes from it. I want to know that as a marketer. I want to know that. That's important analytics for me. And so that's why I go to this screen to get the data that we need. So 43 reactions, 2 comments, 1 share. I count the analytics from shares in those metrics. Here's another post. This is a video, so it looks a little bit different. But if you go to post, you can see things like this. And this is negative feedback. Thankfully, we had 0 negative feedback on this, but if somebody hid this post or reported it as spam or unliked our page because of that, you would want to keep an eye on those metrics to know what you're looking at. You also want to look at your demographic. You can see here our School of Journalism site skews heavily female, and that makes sense because that's the demographics of our school itself. You can get the age demographics, you can get the country, the city of location, things along those lines. Instagram. First of all, you have to have a business account to get insights on Instagram, but that's really easy to do. You just go to your settings and change it to an Instagram business account. One thing that everyone can get before we get into the insights is you can get analytics on Instagram stories. So you get some very basic stuff. One, you just get the total number of eyeballs that you got, but more importantly, you can see how many eyeballs each post got. So if you did a story of 10 and you got 50 on the first one, and then you got 30 on the second one, and you got 10 on the third one, and you got 0 on the last 5 or 6, that shows you didn't have a very high retention rate. So that's where that type of analytics comes into play. It's very basic, but important nonetheless. So I mentioned you have to have a business account to do that. And here's a business account that I help run, and I'll share some of the analytics that go along with it. Instagram is only on mobile for analytics, so your options are fairly limited, but what they do is this kind of roulette wheel where you can go in and select the metric that you're doing and the time range that you're looking for. So here you can see impressions, reach, and engagement for the past year, and the numbers just show up over the picture itself. You can then go and spin that wheel of sorts, and you can go through all of the different things and different time frames that you can look at for Instagram, and they also make it very handy. They have that understanding your insights there, and they'll have definitions for each of those metrics that they're looking at. So you can see here reach and engagement for the past 30 days. I could then go in and do the math on these and be able to do that. You also get demographic information. This is my trainer, and she pays very close attention to her demographic information. She makes products and trains primarily females, and yet her audience is primarily men. And so that's a problem. And that's something I'm working with her to try and correct to get more females following her account as well. And then there's Twitter, which Twitter has analytics for anyone. So you can go in and view analytics on your own personal account. When you go to the analytics page, you see a dashboard like this. They go over all your data month by month, and you can keep a pretty nice little screenshot of it that way. You can see your top tweet in terms of impressions, your top mention in terms of engagements, things along those lines. You can click on the tweets tab there, and you can see all of your posts, and probably more importantly for y'all, you can export that data in a spreadsheet, which is nice. I have a verified account, so I get a little bit more advanced information. So I can see here the interests that my audience has. I can see household income. I can see demographic information, what they do. I can see what types of TV they watch. I can see if they just bought a car. I can see what types of brands they associate with. And I can see which wireless carrier they use. And do they use an iPhone or an Android? Again, these are only for verified accounts. So the big brands, these are coming from the credit reporting agencies. This is that information that Facebook did away with last year in response to the Cambridge Analytica scandal. So how long will this last on Twitter? I don't know, but for now, it's still there. It's very valuable information for advertisers, obviously, but Facebook and Instagram decided to do away with that, giving that data to anyone who was looking for it. I use Canva to teach students how to build reports by hand, and that's what we'll be using in the boot camp. It's a great graphic design tool that's free. The students really love it, and I think you will as well when we get to start working with it. And I end with this. This is a quote from one of my former students, Alexandria, who said she went in for a job interview. It came down to her and 2 other candidates. They walked in and handed them some analytics and said, build us a report. Alexandria was the only one who knew how to build these by hand. So yes, there are platforms that will help you build these with the push of a button, but they cost a lot of money, and a lot of these smaller agencies especially can't afford that. So I think it's very important to learn how to build reports by hand. That's some of the things we'll be doing at the boot camp, and I'm excited to get started with you.